I think overall, the stories that end up sticking with me, both as like a reporter, but also as a consumer, are the ones that have like both the thing that's happening and also the emotional change in the person. Like I can remember those. I can hang on to those.
Welcome to the Nieman Storyboard podcast, where we dig into the craft of journalism and storytelling. I'm Mark Armstrong, editor of Nieman Storyboard. This show is brought to you by the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard. You can get updates by signing up for our newsletter. Just go to niemanstoryboard.org to sign up. Today, I'm excited to share my conversation with Nadia Reiman, who covers immigration for This American Life. The show, which is hosted and co-founded by Ira Glass, is now celebrating 30 years on the air. Reiman joined This American Life in 2018. She and I talked about the show's unique identity and voice in journalism, and how she and her colleagues have used that voice to tell deeply human stories about immigration in the United States. We talked about 3 stories that she worked on. One of them ran in 2019 during Trump's first term, and it won the first ever Pulitzer Prize for audio reporting in 2020. The second story ran last November after Trump was elected to his second term, and it was an interview with Jason Hauser, the former chief of staff for ICE under President Biden. One of Reiman's most recent stories was from April, reporting on a woman trying to track down the whereabouts of her fiancé, a Venezuelan man who had been taken by officers and sent to prison in El Salvador. Before This American Life, Reiman worked as a producer for Latino USA and StoryCorps. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Nadia Reiman. Nadia, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I just wanted to, right now we're recording this in June, and I feel like things around immigration are shifting day by day. And I'm trying to imagine what it's like for you to be covering this in this moment. What is, and you must be inundated with stories from sources. What is it like for you right now?
It is really overwhelming. I think it's really overwhelming for everybody covering the beat right now. And I think for our show, I feel very lucky and like I'm in a place of luxury compared to my other immigration reporting colleagues that have to just jump and cover everything. I don't feel like I have to jump and cover everything. I have more like the capacity and the space in the show where I can just like keep tabs on everything that's happening and kind of start to put my finger on things that are changing or something that we can say something bigger about and kind of hold out for that. In addition to all the things that we always look for in a story for TAL, which is we want to have a character, we want to be able to document them going through something. There has to be an action, there has to be kind of like a clear before and after for that person. And I think finding that character is always a challenge. It's always really hard, even in the simple stories, it's always hard. And I think around immigration, it's particularly hard, at least to me, because it's so sad. Like there's so much pain, and all of our stories have to have like an emotional arc as well. And so it's always like, how do we tell the story about this important thing that's happening that is changing? Because everything is changing. Like every week there's some new insanity that we kind of have to parse through. So how do we tell the story of that with a person that's going through it that sounds different to you than the person that went through something that also is hard and emotionally draining in similar ways about something else that happened last week, you know? So it's always like that balance, and I'm always very aware of what other stories the show has done to be like, have we done something like this? And that's kind of what I'm parsing through a lot. So it feels like I am dipping into everything, but not really like picking a lane yet, which is like a little bit frustrating at times. But also I think once we find the thing that we want to focus on, then it feels really satisfying. And it feels like you can kind of like put it in the context of everything else, which I always like when I consume news myself. I like something that tells me what to make of the moment a little more.
Yeah, is there an originating point when you're talking about these characters and these stories? Like, how does that take shape within This American Life and the story meetings? Are you starting with a conversation about what's happening and then kind of parsing your own sources and your own reporting from that?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think we're constantly talking to each other about things that we're noticing in the news. So like I was at immigration court this morning and I was texting my colleague Zoe, who's not even here because she's on parental leave. And I was like, Zoe, I'm seeing this, like, what do you think of this? And then she was like, oh, maybe we could do something about this. And we were just kind of like shooting ideas back and forth. So I think there's always like that conversation happening with colleagues outside of official kind of like pitch meetings. And then we have a weekly editorial meeting where people can pitch a story. And at that point, we usually pitch like, I'm noticing this thing and I thought it'd be interesting to do a story from the point of view of this person. Here's the person that I found and here's what they would say. And here's like the general strokes of the story. Or like they're about to make this decision and I just want to be with them when they do. Or this change is about to happen and we can see it through their eyes. And here's why like this would be interesting. Here's what this gives us like a view into that we didn't have before. So at the pitch meetings we do that, but I think before there's like a bunch of stuff that I think in most cases would be like pre-reporting that just happens way before you even pitch a story here. So and I think it's also like it's really different depending on what's going on. Sometimes we have a show that has a theme that we're just kind of brainstorming for. And usually that's when we're like, oh, I know this person that could talk about this, or I know this person that like told me this interesting tiny bit and I have a question about it. Maybe we can interview them and get an answer to that question, and that question fits this theme or says something about this theme. So those are, I think, like main ways in which we do it. I have like a kind of like a little Rolodex of people that I constantly check in with. I'm sure they're like sick of me because half the time I'm the type of person that's like, what's happening? Interesting. Not going to report on that yet, you know, as opposed to, because our show is like a slower burn. So it's not, I can't just crank something out every day. But they're really gracious and they do talk to me. So sometimes like they will tell me like, I saw this. They'll tell me like off the record, I know this is happening, and then I'll go chase it and see if there's something there. But I feel like I do a lot of like somebody tells me a tip, I go chase it. It's really interesting. There's something happening, but there's no character. Or there's a character, but the emotional arc isn't fully there. There isn't like a change in emotion. Like they started off feeling one way, they still feel that way by the end. So I can't do anything with it. And I think in those moments, like my storytelling side is like, okay, fine. But like my reporter side is like, oh, but you have this information and this person, you know. But I think overall, the stories that end up sticking with me, both as like a reporter, but also as a consumer, are the ones that have like both the thing that's happening and also the emotional change in the person. Like I can remember those. I can hang on to those. So that's what I try to find too.
So you described yourself as a plot jock when I first interviewed you. So over years you've kind of honed this this eye for story and character. Like how did you hone that?
I think at the end of the day, because I'm not a sophisticated story maker, I think a lot of people here have really creative ways of getting into a story, and I'm just like, who did the what though? And like if nobody did anything, then I kind of can't see my way through it. So it's really hard. So actually, like the story that I did for the election show, that was just an interview with Jason, with the former ICE guy, that one was hard for me to like think of as a story. Like I was just talking about him as a person that I was talking to my editor, and they were like, oh, that's the story. And I was like, but who did the what though? Like I don't see, you know. So it was helpful that it was going to help answer a question. Like that's something that I'm constantly, it's like it can answer a question and that's enough to make it go sometimes. But I think it's just because for me, I have a hard time seeing it in my head and shaping it in my head if I don't have like action that I can say like this happened and then this happened and then this happened. If I have the bones of this happened and we started in one place and at the end we ended up in another, then I know sort of how to tease that out and figure out how did people feel every step of the way, like how to take me through like what you were seeing, take me through what you were feeling, like that I can do, but I need to see the action kind of developing, or I just don't know how to make it really. But I think, you know, different people here on the show have different strategies and different ways of thinking about it. It's just the only way that I feel like able to think through it.
Yeah, so the segment you mentioned, the largest deportation operation in American history, so that ran shortly after the election, right?
Yeah, that was the week of the election, yeah.
Yeah, it's a conversation with Jason Hauser, who was with DHS at the time for the Biden administration, right?
Yes, I believe he left at the somewhere in the Biden administration, but I don't remember off the top of my head now when exactly he left. But he was there for a while. And I actually found him because I was talking to somebody else who I always talk to. Is this woman named Andrea Flores, who's like a brilliant sort of like political thinker and immigration person, policy person. She also worked for the Biden administration, and I think she worked also under Obama, but I'm not sure. But she's just been in the fold for immigration for a long time and is just a really smart thinker. And I was talking to her because I had gone to a press conference where she had talked about how mass deportations, because this was around the time that Trump as a candidate was holding the mass deportations now signs, and mass deportations was like a big thing of his platform. And I kept hearing think tanks and like politicals kind of be like, oh, that can't happen. That can't happen. It's too big. And I think, to be fair, the term mass deportation is very all-encompassing, and you can interpret that in many different ways, but it does make it sound grandiose, and I don't think that that's what they've been able to accomplish. So they were right in the sense that it's too big. But I was interested in knowing, like, but if they were going to try, what would that look like? Could you actually do it? And I think, to me, at the heart of it is like a question about a lot of the things in the immigration system don't operate under rules as we understand them, as like legal or illegal are not really terms that I think make sense in immigration, because so much of it is policy and practice and just like, this is the way we've done it. There's no written law that says we can't or that we need to do it this way, but it's just the way we've done it. And so a lot of the things that happen to people that are not immersed in it don't make any sense. And they're like, but is that legal? And you're like, well, it's yes, but also maybe not, but also it's a policy, so it's not a law, but it's a policy, so it functions like a law. So it's really hard to understand what really can be done. There's discretion built all over the system. So to me, I was interested in like, the attempts at something like this are still pretty massive. And I also, because I knew how many parts of immigration are to the eye of the beholder, I was like, if you change the beholder, you could change the eye, you know? She had said something where she was like, it is really possible, and I like really want people to understand that it can happen. And so I was talking to her and I was like, I really want to I want somebody that can lay that out. Do you know anybody that can really like explain this? And she was like, I know this person. I've heard him talk. He seems really smart. He seems to know all the ins and outs of this. And so she connected me with him. I talked to him, and he was just really able to like break it down, and also just spoke to me like a person, which sounds, I don't mean that in an offensive way. I just think a lot of the times people that work in government are really guarded. And I understand why, but it doesn't work for our show, and it doesn't make for good radio, especially with immigration. It's so complicated already. You need somebody that's going to be able to explain it really directly. And so, like, I talked to him. I knew he could talk about it in this direct way. And so we were kind of like preparing two shows or two options at shows before the election. We were like, okay, we need to be, well, what kind of coverage do we want to do if Trump wins? What kind of coverage do we want to do if Harris wins? Where do we want to be? And we had kind of people running at different things. And so I had recorded that interview with him just to satisfy my curiosity about how could mass deportations happen. And I really like put him through the ringer. I was like, could you do this? Could you do that? What if you didn't have rules about how many people to hold? What if you could use different types of flights? What if you could use the military? Like, I just kind of threw everything I could think of at him just to get a sense of what it could look like. And then when we were done with the interview, I said to him, you know, thank you so much for your time. I don't think that this would run unless Trump wins, because it doesn't seem like, it seems just speculation about something that isn't even on the agenda in the same way. And he was like, no, totally understand. And then I think it was like 2 days after we did the interview was the election. And then the results came in really quickly. And then I just wrote to him and I was like, okay, I need to fact check. I need to like confirm, like, let me run some things by you. Let me like, and so then it was just like a total sprint to get everything else done on time.
Wow. Yeah. So you interviewed him for something like 3.5 hours. Is that right?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that is actually not that long for us. We're really greedy with people's time. I try to be really upfront with people when we go interview them, and I'm like, I'm going to talk to you. I need at least 3 hours, and then maybe I'll come back. And often I just do it in chunks. Like, I'll do like a 3-hour interview, and then I'll do another 3-hour interview to end up with like a 15-minute radio piece. but I don't know how else to do it in the way that we need, because I think a lot of the times it is about getting the clearest sense of a thing. And a lot of our questions are, no, tell me exactly what you thought at that time. And then what did you think next? Like, what was the first thing that jumped into your mind? And then what did you, oh my gosh, how did that make you feel? What did you make of that? And then who did you call? What did they say? What did you say? Like, we just kind of like try to get people to tell it to us like a movie. And so sometimes people just kind of talk that way, and that's pretty magical. But I think in general, we as humans don't talk that way. We just answer the question. So you need a lot of guidance to be able to get that kind of audio. So that's how I do it, at least. And I ask things I know the answers to because I want to hear them spell it out. It's so much active listening. It's like I'm trying to make sure that I have all the steps of the plot of the thing. And then I'm like, did I have a question about that? Did that raise a little flag about something else I want to ask? And then did I get their feelings? Are they clear? Like, was somebody who's not in the room going to understand what they mean? So I often ask the same thing in different ways because of that, because I want to be sure that like I'm fully understanding. And then even after I do that and after we write it, sometimes I'm like, it seems to me that this part was this. Is that right? Like, am I characterizing what you said correctly? Because I do think that, like, there is just naturally, like, when you're talking to somebody, you might think you understand what they mean. And it turns out that's not what they meant, you know? And so, you know, I'm always like, if I did it wrong or if I mischaracterized what you were saying or if I read wrong what you were trying to say, please tell me. Like, I'm not going to be offended. I'm going to be, like, really upset if I put something out that isn't true to you, you know? So, yeah, they're long.
And how do you prep them for that? And are you taking breaks? Like, how do you get them ready for that?
When I get there, I always tell people, like, I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. I'm going to ask you a bunch of nosy questions. I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions you might be sick of answering. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to understand what happened to you or what you went through. If at any point I ask you something that you don't want to answer, you can just tell me that you don't want to talk about that, and that's fine, and we can move on, and it's not a big deal, but I will ask you. Like, part of my job is to ask you. And I feel like that already puts people at ease, and they're kind of like, okay, I can say no, you know? And then I say, like, we can take a break. When you need to take a break, let me know. And if it's an interview with kids, especially where they get kind of tired, or if they seem like they are just kind of like answering things and their energy is low, then I'm like, do you want to take a break? Let's take a break. I do offer that. But if it seems like we're getting in a flow and people are fine, I will keep going. Like, sometimes I will keep going until I see them kind of like slowly deflate. And then I'm like, okay, I've done too much. But I feel like I'm kind of there to get the tape, and I get really nervous about not getting the tape. And so I will get like kind of like a dog with a bone sometimes. And so I think it's always like a balance of knowing that I'm doing that and also like do no harm, pay attention to the way the people are looking at you. They look like they need some space, back off, you know? So I try to do that, but I think the only way I know how to do it is to give people the license to tell me that they need me to go away.
And you talk about active listening. Do you bring notes? Do you try to avoid looking at them? Like, do you have ways that you kind of focus?
I have questions. Like, I can't do it without a question list. I try to keep the question list to one page because otherwise you're ruffling through and I find that distracting. And I usually tell people, like, I did an interview on Zoom yesterday and I didn't do this. And I was like, because normally I'd say, like, to people, like, if I look off to the side like this, I'm looking at my questions because I don't want people to think that I'm just like, I don't know, checking my phone or whatever, you know? So normally, like, I will have a question list. I will try to follow that question list. And the way that I do it is, like, I definitely want to hit all the questions on the question list, but I could go off on tangents depending on what people are saying at any point in the question list, and then I just get back to the question list. So it's not like I can only ask those, but they are the ones that I absolutely will ask. And that's all I do. I don't take notes. I feel like if I did that and took notes, I just couldn't listen. And I'm also kind of like, I'm listening for the actual words coming out of people's mouths, but I'm also listening for the emotion and the body language, because I think sometimes in those interviews, I'm kind of like, wait, why did you hesitate? What happened? You know, or there's like a little bit of sort of getting a sense of them as people that I don't think I can't do while taking notes. Bless those that can. But like, if I do that, then I feel like I'm missing that part of it.
Yeah. Let's listen to a clip from your interview with Jason.
Jason thinks that, first of all, the new Trump administration will immediately start to prep for this, like the day after the election, this week. They would start talking to law enforcement in different cities and getting them to agree to cooperate, hit the ground running in January. ICE would talk to home countries to get them to agree to take people back. And after those two things align, Jason says, ICE could decide to deport someone and they'd be out of the country within 24 hours.
I think the first 90 days is going to be hell. You're going to see the buses. You're going to see the migrants in your home, not just blue cities, red cities, Miami, Houston, Charlotte, like red states, Kansas City, St. Louis, right? You're going to see kids not in your schools. You're going to know where they're at because they're waiting in a detention cell and they have cell phones. You're going to see it in social media. You're going to see businesses not be able to open up because their workers didn't show up. You're going to see businesses being raided, and it's going to become more intimate. This isn't going to be about like separating a family at the border that somebody doesn't know that family member. You're talking about separations and movements in your communities where you're going to know the guy. Bill, Juan, Louise, you're going to know the individuals.
What strikes you sort of listening back to that?
It's crazy. It's crazy how much he got right. A little bit. I feel like when that story came out, I was a little nervous because I was like, I think Jason has a really good finger on the pulse. So I wasn't nervous about him not being right, but I was aware that it was kind of a speculative story, right? It's like what could happen. And then, so much of it has happened that way. I just was looking into the story of this teenager in Massachusetts that got picked up on his way back from volleyball practice, I think it was, and all the kids like in his school were like protesting because they wanted him back. And there have been a lot of arrests in red states, also in blue states. Like a lot of what he said is actually happening. I don't think it's happening quite as massively as he says at points, but it is happening. Like the intention that he's pointing to about the flashiness of how it's being talked about by the administration I was like, wow, this is kind of scarily spot on. Like, just because I think at one point I texted him and I was like, Jason, what does it feel being right about everything? and he was kind of like, oh, he was like, I don't like being right. Because, I think the way that he sees it is he also sees this as like not being helpful to law enforcement and not being helpful to making anything safer, because he's somebody that's worked in enforcement a lot. So yeah, it's striking to listen back to it now with some distance from when I made the thing.
For me also, I was noting just sort of the voice of This American Life and how you write an intro that's very casual, plain spoken, straightforward, and even the tone of your voice and how you introduce that stuff. Is that something that you learned pretty quickly? And how was that sort of brought into your writing?
I didn't learn that quickly. Nothing that I've learned here I feel like I've learned quickly. But that's one of the things that I've always really liked about this job is I feel like I'm constantly challenged, and that always feels exciting. Yeah, I've always liked the tone of TAL. It's something that I have always kind of felt was nice and honest and refreshing. But I wasn't as sharp of a writer when I first came because I wasn't used to writing in that way. I'm still sort of feel like I just started to get my sea legs after like 8 years. And I think there's a lot of things that Ira does really artfully and quickly that I'm just kind of like, wow, I don't know how he did that in that way, And I don't think that I ever will know how he did it in that way. But I do think that it's a space in a show that allows you to be direct if you want to. And so I think a lot of those parts are just parts that I was like, I really like this and I want to say this. And, and I think, to the show's credit, I've never felt like I couldn't say something that I wanted to say, that I had evidence for. And I'm like a very trepidatious person in putting something on air. So I'm not going to be like saying something that I don't think I can back up. But there's kind of like a say it with your chest thing that I think is happening more and more in the show that I like, that I always respond to well, again, in like the media that I like and that I consume. So I'm happy that we can do that. And a lot of it is also just like we're casual in our interview style. Like we talk to people in the way that you would talk to people. And I'm like at a bar or a restaurant or just your friends. And I'm very aware of that when I interview people. And I try not to like get spun out of that when you talk to people that have power or people that are a little bit more reserved. I just try to like emulate the type of conversation I want to have. Like that conversation I had with Jason was the longest I talked to Jason. I talked to Jason for like 10 minutes before, 10, 15 minutes to just sort of like get a sense of him. And then I was like, yeah, I feel like he could answer these questions very well. And then I also had my coworker at the time, Elise Spiegel, help produce that. And so she was also on that call, and she was like, she also pipes in and like asks some really direct questions. Because I think one thing that can happen is you get in the weeds yourself if you know the subject. And so she was like one little step removed. So she'd be like, no, wait, say that. What do you mean? What is it going to be like at the beginning? Can you say that? And then that's when he was like, I think the first 90 days are going to be hell. Like he said that as a response to just Elise kind of asking him really directly. And so I think it's just like a good reminder that like you, kind of the way that you talk is the way people talk back to you. So if you are really direct and really casual, people start to naturally talk back in a really direct and casual way. And then that ends up sounding more real. Because I think that that's when you kind of get to the essence of what people are trying to say anyway.
And did you know when you said the first 90 days are going to be hell, that was like, oh, that's our opening?
No, that was Elise again. Elise was like, that's your opening. I wasn't sure what her opening was going to be. And that structure was very much like Elise being like, you started here and then you go there. And I was like, okay, I see it. But again, because this was not a story where I had like a lot of plot, I was like, what is the thing? What is the action? Who's doing the what? And and she was just like, no, it's a question. And then you have the next question. And the natural list is the next question that comes. And that's what pushes you along. So it was really helpful to have her on that. And then my editor too, Laura Starcheski, who's like a brilliant editor, also was just kind of there being like, no, this is not clear. Ask it more directly. Yes, this tape is the tape that we need. Yes, this feels compelling. This is the answer to the question. So you want to like start with this. I just, anything that you hear that we make that sounds direct and neat and really easy to follow for you is because there's a team of people here that are helping you cut through the muck and are helping to keep you honest and to keep others honest and are coming up with brilliant ideas to fix something that you didn't know how to fix yourself. Like none of this, I would say I made alone. None of it.
And to your point about language and rapport and voice and your ability to have license to be able to call stuff out when you hear it. Let's listen to another clip from your conversation with Jason. Let's listen to number 3.
I wanted to know, where would you hold all these people? Would you build tent camps to hold people?
If it's I'm not looking out for the care of the law enforcement officers that are overseeing it or the migrants, yes, you could. When we did all the evacs, and ICE had a very big support in the evacuation out of Afghanistan, we brought on soft-sided facilities at Fort Dix, New Jersey, and other places around the country. But again,
soft-sided facilities, is that euphemism for tents?
Well, I mean, that is, yes. They're big, sort of like fair tent, like carnival tents. They're very thick plastic and they're soft. Yeah. But what I'm saying is let's say we put 1,000.
They're weatherproof. They're weatherproof.
Well,
but
they're not just like
Oh man, poor Jason.
Just like I feel like that is missing from a lot of sort of traditional news, which is the ability to like call out jargon and things that really kind of obscure what we're talking about, right?
I agree. It drives me nuts. That was one of the moments in the interview that I was like, oh, I want this in, especially because he was such a good sport about it, because he was like, well, yeah, okay, that's what it is. Like he was so sheepish at like admitting that he had just said something. I think it's just people get caught in that jargony thing. And I just thought it was so funny and so weird. And I think a lot of it because he's very precise. He was trying to be really technical. And I was just kind of like, a tent is a tent, my dude. Like, this is a tent. And I get his point that he was like, they're not like camping tents. And I was like, okay, yeah, fair. But I think to me, like, those moments like are satisfying because, one, it's a good reminder to me that like people are going to be listening to this and they're not reading immigration news all day. They don't know what all these acronyms are. You know, they don't understand. Like, and I don't blame them. It's so much, you know, and so it's a good way of kind of being there for the listener. And then at the same time, I think it's like a moment of humanity that kind of like brings you and the person you're interviewing a little bit to level, you know, where you're kind of like, come on, man. You know, and he loosened up after that too, you know? So I think I was doing it more to kind of be jokey and to get those little moments. Because I think it's also like, you know, like when you're making a radio story about something really complicated and hard, like you need those little moments of delight and brevity just to carry it through. Otherwise it's a slog. And I don't want it to be a slog. I want it to be something that people enjoy listening to, even if it's about something serious.
You know, you want it to be heard, right?
Yeah, and I want it to be human. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all a bunch of humans doing this stuff to humans. And so I think the more that we can get people to understand that and to feel like they're, you know, eye to eye with anyone, an immigration official or, you know, a random immigrant that they've never talked to, doesn't matter to me. Like, I just want them to be eye to eye and be able to see and hear and be in that person's point of view. And I wanted to break Jason a little bit out of talking to me like an immigration person and more like, you're just a person talking to another person. What do you mean? What does that mean?
Yeah.
And it was funny, like when he said it, I was like, this is a ridiculous thing. I actually had not heard somebody call it a soft-sided facility. And I was just like, what in the jargon world is this? What is that? So it just felt like, I don't know, this was my natural reaction at the moment.
The other thing about that interview, you mentioned that there are a lot of things that have come true with what he spoke about. There's a lot of pieces where he's really spending a lot of time differentiating between policy and the law. And it's kind of chilling to sort of listen back to that, just myself as a listener, to understand that the Trump administration is not really caring or not really differentiating between policy and law, that has been something they've been pushing on regardless of whether it's policy or law, right?
It is like law is subject to interpretation too, you know? So you could easily say, I think they have been incredibly shrewd and thorough this go around. And I think that they have combed through all these obscure, technically legal things that were never applied in that way. And wherever there's like a little discretion, a little on the eye of the beholder, they're like, we're going to interpret it this way until the courts tell us to stop. And they can do a lot with that. And I think in addition, because a lot of it is just practice, you know, like these safe spaces, so-called safe spaces that ICE wouldn't go pick up undocumented people in. There's nothing in the INA that says that ICE doesn't have, that there's no enforcement in certain areas. That's just policy. It was just something that ICE decided we're not going to do. So anything that could be decided we're not going to do, we're going to do another way, can be done another way. Similarly, like there's so many things that are to the discretion of the people running them. Like a lot of the benefits interviews for visas, you know, it's about like an agent looking at the file, talking to the person, deciding, yes, this person is credible, whatever credible means. Yes, this answer is sufficient, whatever sufficient means. So there's a lot of wiggle room there. You can have somebody that decides now sufficient means like airtight, like not even judge level sufficient. Nobody can meet that. And what can you say? There's nothing you can really say, you know? So I knew that. I knew there was so much of that in the system already, you know, that I was always kind of like, yes, they could. I feel like they could do a lot without having to change the Immigration Nationality Act. I know that a lot of lawyers are like, no, you're supposed to change the act first. And I understand that. But I think because there's room for wiggle and interpretation, there's a lot you can do.
I'd like to sort of fast forward to your latest piece, Solving for Wear. So this one was produced in April?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. So this is one of your most recent pieces. Let's play the opening, and then we can talk through.
When Mari shows me this video, it feels like something I'm not supposed to be watching. On the screen is her fiancé, Mikael. He's shirtless, he's crisply lined up. He's young, 23, bright green eyes, wild curly hair tucked under a baseball cap. And he's holding a tattoo gun, giving himself a tattoo on his stomach, while she teases him. Says he's never gonna tattoo her again. He looks up and laughs, his mouth full of braces. Mari is always sort of dragging Mikael about his tattoos. He has lots of them. Some which Mari finds offensively dumb.
Tiene un Mickey Mouse, pero fumando.
He has a Mickey Mouse, but the Mickey Mouse is smoking. He used to smoke, and he used to do ridiculous things like that, because to me they're ridiculous things, but yeah. And then behind that, he has like a little hand with an eye, and he tells me that eye sees everything. And I was just like, bueno, okay.
Está bien. Tiene como que también otro...
And he has something else there, like just like an ugly doll, like it looks like a toad. It has big eyes.
Parece un sapo.
It's E.T. smoking a blunt.
I love that. It's such a beautiful moment. Like, how did you, and E.T. smoking a blunt?
Yeah.
How did you capture that?
Well, the tattoo tape, I loved from the beginning, because that was the first time I talked to Mari, I talked to her on the phone. And then she was describing, she was like, oh, he has all these like stupid tattoos. They're so dumb. And she was already kind of like complaining about the dumb tattoos. And then the second time I talked to her, I was in person. And she like brought up the dumb tattoos again. And in a very like eye-rolly way, where she was just like, oh, I can't believe, because they're so tacky. They're so stupid. And I was like, oh, can you show me? And so she was scrolling through pictures on her phone, and she was showing me the tattoos. And then she was like, oh, there's that weird, like, he has like that toad. It looks like a toad. And I saw the picture, and I was like, oh, that's E.T. That's E.T. smoking a blunt. And she was like, is that what that is? I don't know what that is. She's like 23. I don't think she was even alive when like this movie came out. So I really liked that moment. Like when I was doing the interviews, I really liked that moment, because to me, like, it was just like funny and real, and it gave me like a real picture of them. And so I knew I wanted that like at the beginning. I didn't think of putting the video at the beginning. That was, I think it was either Ira or Emmanuel or both of them at an edit, because I was talking about the video and I showed them the video. And I said, it's like, it was, she just showed it to me, and it looked like something I wasn't supposed to see. Like, it looked like an intimate thing, and she just showed it to me. And I was like, write that down and start with a video. And so we went back and forth in that piece on how to start it. We had like an edit at one point. It was starting just like when the ICE officers come and get him. But then it was like hard to get into it, because it just sounded like a ton of other deportation stories. It didn't sound like, it didn't grab you in the same way. And so then we went back to the original structure that I had, which was like starting with like the tattoo tape, because they used to start with just like her describing the tattoos and me saying like it's E.T. smoking a blunt, you know. And then Ira was like, no, do the videos and then the tattoo. So then we did like the video and then the tattoo, and that seemed to help, because I think you get a sense of them as a couple, you get a sense of Mikael as a person, and then everything that happens afterwards. Like, I think a lot of what's happening now is like almost absurd. And so I don't think you get a sense of that absurdity until, like, without front loading the type of tattoos that this person had that are seemingly the reason that they think that he is Tren de Aragua, and they're truly, like, I saw the pictures and the videos, truly some dumb tattoo artist tattoos that you can tell he was like, I'll just practice on myself. Like, here's a random hand, here is like Mari's name, here is like, you know, just like a collection of bad choice tattoos. And so I think it helps to just it helps you have a sense of them right off the bat.
Yeah, and you had mentioned in our previous conversation just about the establishing humanity and agency in the subjects of these stories versus, you know, jumping straight to a situation where they're being arrested.
Yeah. I think this is where where that side of me gets in conflict with like the plot side of me, because I'm like, nothing is happening, you know? But I think often when you're reporting on stories where so many just tragic and hard things are happening to a group of people in the community, if you just talk about what happened, you end up kind of accidentally talking about what happened to them. And so it's people that things happen to, and that makes it seem like they have no choice in the matter, that they have no agencies. And I'm not saying that some of these things don't happen to them outside of their control. That's different. There are things happening to them that are outside of their control. But I think the way that you tell people's stories, you end up kind of making them a little bit two-dimensional if you don't also show the internal process, the choices, their thoughts. And so I think getting a sense of them as people and really like laying out how active Mari was from the beginning and how much of like a go-getter she is and how she just doesn't stop moving, kind of, and getting her to really explain to me who Mikael is, because I didn't get to meet him. Like, that helps you sort of like see them as full people that are going through something rather than people that something is happening to, that have like no real motion as characters.
I wanted to ask you about working with an interpreter.
Oh yeah, I worked with Nadia Reiman. She's the best.
You also speak Spanish fluently as well.
Yeah. That's actually been like a journey, because the way that TAL has done immigration reporting, saying immigration reporting because that's the bulk of the Spanish speakers that we would talk to on the show before my time, and I think probably still, is, you know, we have somebody go out with an interpreter who goes out in the field and does live interpretation as the reporter / producer is getting the tape. And so when I first came to work here, I was doing that too, because I was like doing it just like you guys do it. And then it was awkward because the people I was interviewing were like, you speak Spanish, why are you pretending to speak English with this other person that also speaks Spanish? And I was like, oh, you're right, that is awkward, it's weird. Like, I'm just making it unnatural for no reason at all. So then at that point on, I was just like, I'm just going to talk to people, I'm just going to do the interviews, and then we'll do the interpretation afterwards. So I do it that way, but that's because I'm a native speaker, and to me, it just took away, like, doing it the other way would be adding like a layer of artifice that didn't feel natural to me. But we have reporters, producers on staff that are not native Spanish speakers, and that's how they do it. They go out with an interpreter who does live interpretation. I have done it for other stories where it's not Spanish, right? But for this, I did all the interviews in Spanish with Mari the whole time. And then I went, once I had selected like the clips that we were going to use, then I went with Ana Yancy Diaz-Cortez, who's this amazing reporter who was also randomly an amazing live interpreter. I don't know how she does it, because it's a completely hard skill. I've tried to do it for people and I can't do it, but she's really good at it. And so she did the live interpretation, and she was so good at not only like the accuracy, but just also getting the emotion and the feeling of like the things that Mari was saying. So it made it super easy, and it made it feel so much livelier to the English speakers once they heard it. So yeah, that's the way I do it. But I like to do it in that way, and I also like to leave a little bits of Spanish in the clear, sometimes untranslated if they're small enough, if you can follow, because I feel like it's nice. It's like a nice little thing for people that speak the language to kind of hear a little bit of it. And also, I think it's a way for you to hear the original essence of the person, even when you have somebody else's voice over it. But yeah, I think we think about that a lot in the show, like how to use interpreters and how to mix in voices in a way that you're being authentic to the feeling of the person and also to the words, the content.
What tips do you have for journalists on working with interpreters?
Give them lots of breaks. That was a tip that I got from Miki Meek, who's like a super stellar reporter, producer here. And she was like, give them breaks because they will get tired. And she has a lot of experience working with interpreters. And it's true, because it's such mentally taxing work that if you don't give people breaks, then their interpretation starts to suffer because your brain just can't handle that much. So build in more time. Like, that's all I would say, is build in more time. Courts have really great interpreters that do really great live interpretation. That's where I go and find interpreters for other languages, is I go through court interpreters first. And we do something that's kind of like casting, because some interpreters are really good at the accuracy of the words, but we need somebody to get like the feeling that the person is conveying, even more than the accuracy of the words. What we need for our show is for them to match the feeling and the emotion of the person more than we need the exact words to be the same. Yeah, and I think often the best interpreters for our show end up being those that just really can inhabit the person.
Yeah, so in this story, Mikhail disappears and has been arrested by officials who may be ICE, but ends up being found in a video of the Venezuelan migrants who were taken to El Salvador.
Yeah.
I want to play another clip from this piece as well.
Mari is in a daze. She doesn't know why they were taking him but letting her go. They uncuff her. They let Mikhail get dressed. The one that speaks Spanish tells Mari that they're taking him to Federal Plaza, an ICE office in Manhattan. And then it's over. The men in uniforms take Mikhail away, and Mari is left looking around, wondering what just happened.
I didn't know what to do, so the first thing I did was, I don't know, I went to work.
You went to work after that?
Sí, sí.
Why?
No sabía qué hacer.
I didn't know what to do. I thought to myself, look, I'll go to work, I'll look for help. I just didn't know what to do. I didn't know. Everything felt stuck. I've never gone through something like this.
Mikhail lived in Colombia for a while. I did a criminal records search there using his Venezuelan government ID number. Nothing. This lack of information connecting Mikhail to Tren de Aragua, that doesn't seem to deter our government. Robert Cerna, an acting field office director for ICE's removal operations, said something that stuck with me. Quote, "The lack of specific information about each individual actually highlights the risk they pose. It demonstrates that they are terrorists, with regard to whom we lack a complete profile." So, according to the government, no proof that you're a criminal is the greatest proof of all. Mari is convinced that Mikhail's tattoos, that's the only reason the government thinks he's a gang member. Which is not crazy. The government is looking at tattoos. They have a list of Tren de Aragua suspicious tattoos, and it is broad. Trains, crowns, roses, clocks, a star, a Michael Jordan. If this is a list of gang tattoos, everyone under 50 is in a gang.
I have two questions from that segment. One is, you talked about This American Life speaking from its chest a little more, and how you write to that.
It's funny, you're like pointing out all like the little sassy things that I put in that I thought were just like for me. I don't know, that was just a thought I had when I was looking at the list, because I had a source that was telling me about the list because they were told to look for these tattoos way before, as like when the Tren de Aragua craze started, they were told to look for these tattoos, and they were like, I mean, it was like the list was so broad that I was just kind of like, what is this? And then I had talked to Rona Rizquez, and she had said that half of the, like, she was like, oh, they look for like tigers or something and roses, and those were like a trend in Venezuela at the time, so everybody was getting, like, any young person was getting this tattoo. And then I saw there was like an HSI. They had like a photo, like a little photo list of all the tattoos. Homeland Security Investigations had like this photo list of all the tattoos, and they had and it also had like a Michael Jordan. And so I was like, okay, I was like kind of like keeping track. I was like, there's roses, there's like maybe tigers, I don't know. There's definitely the Michael Jordan. There's the crown, and so there were so many, and they were so varied. And I have a sister who's an aspiring tattoo artist who's 24. My cousin is a tattooer. And so, like, I've seen the types of tattoos that these kids are getting. And I was just like, this is just like any kid gets a tattoo. Like, any kid gets a Michael Jordan. Any kid gets a crown. That's just like, it's so many. And so I was just kind of like, this list is so wide and there are so many things in it that it's, I don't know, it's the only thing I could think of to say to like make something off of the list, because I think otherwise you're just talking about a list and you're kind of like, why are you telling me this list? And so I think that was how I could explain why I was telling everybody like all these details. It's not just that the list is long, is that it's like, it's dumb young person tattoos. I don't know how you decide that those are TDA.
Yeah, and I feel like I, as a listener, when I hear that segment, the work you are doing represents the questions that I have.
Oh, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I think at the time we also kind of make it in-house because it's a little bit of like a moment of delight that we like. Like we're kind of like, oh yeah, that's kind of funny and that's kind of true and it's satisfying. So let's just do it, you know? So it's nice to know that it's not just delightful to us. It's also helpful to others.
Well, and important too, because it strikes me as a kind of thing that maybe legacy news organizations would not go out on a limb to say.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's definitely tonally different to say something like that. But it's not untrue.
No. And that's why I think that's what I appreciate about your work is that you are able to be a voice and a guide that represents the listener and does so in a way that kind of traditional news organizations have not allowed themselves to do over the years to their detriment.
Thank you. That's all a credit to the show, because I mean, obviously I think we can all think these things and want to say these things, but it's good to have, like, you know, the robust storytelling and editorial backbone of the show to help you back it up. Yeah, I think that's something that Ira is also aware of, is the tone of the show has to be fun and casual and enjoyable to listen to. And I think those are the things that make it so.
That leads me to my second question about that segment, which were the music choices. That is very unique to This American Life, right? How does the music chosen for these like specific moments?
Well, it's funny because I'm one of the people here that helps with the music. We have great mixers that help master and mix all the stories. And they have kind of like a specific, I always think of the music and like the pace of the thing to be an editorial choice, because it is trying to help you feel something, and it is trying to help you sit with like an idea or a moment in a way that is trying to say something. So normally we have mixers come in and they listen to the story, and then they put in music that they think is tonally hitting the thing that you're trying to do with the story. And then we have folks that then listen to that, and then they like either yay or nay the choices, or offer different choices, or help kind of like be like another editorial layer to that. I am very hands-on with mine because I really like scoring and I really like mixing. I always have. When I worked at Latino USA, I would listen to everything and then repaste things, or be like, not that song, but this song. Like I have feelings about music. And so for me, like in this one specifically, I wanted the music to be driving it forward and to have feeling, but not be cheesy. It's really easy when something has feeling to just kind of push it over the edge. And then it's just like, saccharine, and it just doesn't work, and it's actually counteractive to what you're trying to do with the story. So I wanted the music to kind of strike that balance, and also be dynamic enough to keep it going.
That's great. Another segment, a story you worked on, won the Pulitzer Prize. If we could talk about that. I'll play a clip for you and then we can talk about the whole show. Okay. So this segment is Goodbye Stranger.
It was all shrouded in so much secrecy.
This is another asylum officer. We're calling her Anne. We used an actor here too, to protect her identity. Over the next few weeks, Anne starts picking up around the office that some of her colleagues were being called in quietly and asked to go to the border in San Diego. And instead of the credible fear screenings they'd always done, they seemed to be doing something entirely different under MPP. A whole new kind of interview, with different rules. She knew she was going to have to start doing them too, so she pulled aside a coworker who'd already been sent to the border.
I was asking her, hey, like, what's the training? Like, what is this? And she was like, I'm not allowed to talk to you about it.
Another asylum officer.
Yeah.
Molly's such a star. She's so good.
So this is Molly O'Toole.
Yeah.
Pulitzer Prize winner. How often does this happen where you work with actors? These were actors re-recording conversations from asylum officers who were staying anonymous, right?
Yeah, this was something we talked about a lot and thought about a lot when doing this story. It's hard, because I think because we're audio, we're not print, we can't offer people anonymity in that way. So we had to have long conversations about how to do this story. And it was a story where we felt we really needed it because besides Doug, everybody else was still working for USCIS and they were not allowed to talk to us. And it was a matter of public interest, what was happening. And so we felt pretty sure that we wanted to figure out a way to do the story, and we didn't know how. And we talked about all kinds of ways. Do we distort their voice? Do we pitch shift it? How do we do it? And ultimately, all the processing we could do at that time to disrupt someone's voice could be undone fairly easily. And if you make it to the point where it can't be undone, it's so robotic that you don't get a sense of the person anymore. And so we opted for working with actors. And it's funny because I remember one of the first edits that we did of it, one of the feedback from somebody here was like, oh, I think that actor was really, they're too upset in this part. Can we get them to redo it so they're not as upset? And I was like, that's not the actor yet. That's just the person. They're just really upset. So, in reality, when I worked with the actors to record these, I was try to match the tone as much as you can. Don't cry if they're crying. Don't force yourself to cry. But if the person sounds sad, try to sound like them. Try to, emulate their cadence. And it's funny because the two actors that we worked with for this, they were both kind of this is a really interesting acting exercise. I haven't done this in a long time. This is really interesting. It's I have to parrot and this is good. It was such a fun puzzle to figure out, honestly, because I was thinking if we can figure out how to do this in a way that is ethically right and works as an audio piece, then this opens up the door to the type of reporting that we can do. Because now I feel when I talk to people inside the government, I can say, if you need full anonymity, we can do that. We can figure out a way of doing that. Because before they would just kind of be I can't talk to you on the radio. How am I going to talk to you? And I would be I don't know. But we gave it a lot of thought. And we gave it a lot of thought about how we were going to disclose to the audience, how we're going to say it, and how we're going to make the audience understand that we're not playing up anything. Just because it's an actor, it's not acted. We're literally just trying to borrow their vocal cords as much as we can. So that was our editorial thinking behind that.
I wanted to ask you real quick about your Latino USA experience and your background. And so prior to This American Life, you were at Latino USA. What was that experience like?
I was. It was great. I always tell my friends that if I hadn't gotten a taste of This American Life, I would still be at Latino USA because I loved that job. It was really fun. It was a space where just a bunch of us were making things together, and it was full of energy and excitement, and we could experiment, and it felt really freeing to be able to do that. And I also felt Maria had a lot of trust in me, and so I felt like I was editorially able to shape the show in a way that was really satisfying. But then we pitched a story to This American Life when I was working at Latino USA, and they came in and saw the way that TAL edits together, and I was like, this is so great. And then I just kind of got excited about it. So that's partially why I then wanted to come here after that, because it seemed like such a new way of doing things.
What does it mean, TAL edits together?
So we did this at Latino USA too, but here it's so much more intense. Everybody gets in a room. So the way that we edit stories is everybody gets in a room, or you pull in a number of team members in a room that haven't heard the story before. And it's you, your editor, and 2 or 3 people that haven't heard the story before. And you read it live and you play the tape live, and everybody is taking these furious notes in these little notebooks that they have all over the office. And they're writing things, and then you don't know what they're saying, and then you get done, and then you're ta-da! and then we go around, and we have these filters that help us sort of think about accuracy and race in the story specifically. So we talk about that, how are we talking about, if this is a group of people of color, are we talking about this in a smart way? Are we being accurate? Is there anything that we're missing? And there's a question there that's really helpful, which is we always ask the person doing the story, what is it that you want to say? What do you think is coming across? And that's such a helpful question, because I have often been in edits where somebody will say, I really want to say this. And then I'm like, oh, that didn't come across. Okay, that's helpful. Now I know what kind of guidance to give you or where to help you move the story. And it's helpful for you also as the person making it to say it, to then have people say I totally get that, or have people go like, oh, I didn't get that at all. And then you're kind of like, okay, now I know what to do. So everybody gives you notes. Everybody at that point is like, here's what was working for me. Here's what wasn't working for me. Here's what I was confused in. And I'm wondering, do you have more tape of this? Do you have more tape of that? And then you take all those notes with your editor, and then you go back and you furiously fix things and put things together and get more tape if you need to get more tape. And then you do it again, and then you do it again, and you do it again, like 3 or 4 times with different people in the room until you get to a point with one of the more senior people, which is like either Ira, Emmanuel, or David, says to you like, yes, we're good for a final word edit. And then at that point, everybody sits there with their laptops and you all like are like taking care of every sentence, and you're like, can you say this better? I'm not sure about this. What if you move this here? Make this a beat shorter. Like, and so then you kind of polish. And then you go record it. So everything is just like so carefully crafted. That's why it's so good, you know? There's so much brain power behind even the simplest of things. And so that was really exciting. And it was not something that we had the luxury to do at Latino USA, because we just were like, there was less of us putting out a show quicker. And so it just was the nature of it. There's like other things there that were great and run really speedily and nice. But at that time, like that was the part that I found exciting, and the part that I didn't know what to do. Like I didn't know how to do it. And so I was like, oh, I can learn. And it's kind of nice to have that feeling again. Because I think you get at a point when you've been doing this for a while where you're like you get a little autopilot-y, and that's no fun. And but at the beginning of my time at Latino USA, it also felt like that. It felt new and exciting because it was, you know. But yeah, it was nice to be in that space too, and be like specifically focused on like Latino stories with like a staff that had that focus too. Because I think it's like it's another type of luxury to be able to like really deep dive into your own community like that. And so that was lovely. That was lovely. I was so glad to be there.
And it gave you a chance to write and produce very personal stories as well. So you were born in Costa Rica, right? And moved to the U.S. as a child?
Yeah.
You became a U.S. citizen in 2010, and you did this really great first-person piece.
Oh, God, that's so embarrassing. That's so long ago. Yeah. When you said that, I was like, wow, that is a deep dive. I haven't thought about that piece in so long. Yeah, I mean, I think partially the reason why I'm interested in making immigration reporting palatable for people is because I've been through the immigration system myself, and I know how nonsensical and like obtuse and crazy it can be. And so I think if I can help people make sense of it, that feels important to me. I mean, like, I feel like, I don't know if you can see it, but like right behind me, this is very old and I probably need to update it, but this is a chart from, I forget which organization, that's like a roadmap to getting a green card. And it's the most confusing looking thing. Like I printed it out because when it showed you like, here are like the different paths, I was like, this makes no sense. Like it just looks as convoluted as it is. And I feel like you don't get to see that unless you've gone through the system yourself in some way. And I think if most people knew about it, they would also be kind of confused and fascinated and find it in a way as like farcical as I think it is in some ways. So I as a kid, I spent like my childhood going through like American embassies abroad to confirm things and change things depending on how my parents' status was changing. And so I got to see a lot of that too. I was so aware that my peers didn't know about it because I also grew up in like really white spaces. Like I came into the US and lived in Arizona for a little bit with my family, but then we mostly were in Ohio. And then we were in Western New York. And in both areas, both in like my school and my neighborhood in Ohio and my school and neighborhood in Western New York were predominantly white. And so there was like nobody else who had been born abroad or had any reason to interact with the immigration system. And so I just kind of spent my life surrounded by people that either didn't know about that part of my life or knew about it, but in a very nebulous way. Like, Nadia comes from abroad and now she's here and she has papers and that's all I know, you know? I guess it like seemed like a no-brainer to me to want to explain it to people.
Do you have specific family memories of, I know you mentioned going to embassies and things like that. Was it a relatively smooth process at the time, even though it was complicated?
Yeah. For us, it was relatively smooth because my parents were international students. My stepdad was an international student, and then when he and my mom got married, she then applied for school here as well and got into a program. So then she also became an international student. So then I became a dependent of international students. And that was how our visa process began. So I forget how often that had to be renewed in American embassies. But I would go back home to see family in Costa Rica every summer. So for me, it was like fairly easy to go and just give my papers and everything was fine. But when my mom got hired by a university and then they switched to start like the on your way to green card visa, which I think was like an H4 at that time. I don't remember if it's still the same or I think that was the visit where we had to go to the American consulate in Mexico for my stepdad because my stepdad's Mexican. So it wasn't the same as us in Costa Rica. Mm-hmm. And he was fine. Our process was fine. But I remember there was this like elderly lady. She looked like she was either like indigenous. She spoke an indigenous language, like Spanish was not her strongest language. And she was trying to visit she had like some kid in the US and she was trying to visit him and she got her visa denied. And the person at the window was so mean, like so mean to her. And she was like clearly just trying to explain why she wanted to go. And I remember just feeling so bad for her. And I wasn't necessarily feeling like I didn't know what to make of her not getting her visa. I didn't understand the whys, but I just felt for her because she was sad and this lady was just yelling at her. And so I remember that moment as being something where I was like, that doesn't seem right. Like, that doesn't seem like the best way to do this, you know? And I remember, like, my mom was like, don't stare at her. Mom was like, don't stare at her. It'll make her feel worse. And I was like, okay, don't stare, you know? And so I was trying not to stare. So definitely, like, there were moments like that where I saw others around me that were treated just in a rough way. But that was kind of my only experience with it because I never lived in like a border town. I did an abroad studies program where I did a U.S.-Mexico border studies program when I was in college. And so there I lived in Ciudad Juarez and I would cross into El Paso and I would do community service in Ciudad Juarez and I would go to school in El Paso. And it was just like about being in the border region. And that was interesting because I got to see sort of how it was almost like a swiping card system. Like people would come in from El Paso and just swipe, or from Juarez and would swipe in and then swipe back out. And it was just kind of like, it felt like going on the subway. Like there was no real screening. And they screened me hard one time because at that point I had my green card, but I hadn't gotten it yet. So they gave me like a stamp until it arrived in the mail. And so like the Border Patrol was like utterly confused. Like they were just like, you have a Costa Rican passport, you have like the stamp, but like you're going to the US, but like you speak, I don't understand like what's happening. And so they like took me to like a room and like were asking me extra questions. And I was a teenager, so I was like, ask me whatever, I don't care, you know? And so that was kind of it. But that was the first time I had been in like a border region where I saw like how intertwined like that area of the US and Mexico really is in like a practical way. And so that was also really formative for me because I was like, this is interesting and this is unlike anything I imagined. And it's very different from being in like consular office abroad too. So I think the combination of both of those things kind of showed me like the breadth of the system and the ways in which it can be like really cruel and also the ways in which it can be really kind of like nonsensically practical and both at the same time. And so yeah, and then I think you're just, you know, you're like an immigrant Latino in the U.S., like you're around the community, you hear all kinds of things from people, you know how multidimensional it truly is, and I just wanted other people to see it and feel it too.
Who are some of your favorite writers, journalists, podcasters, radio people that you follow?
I mean, I love Jamel Bowie. I really like reading his stuff. I really like Masha Gessen. Their writing is just so, it helps me make sense of things so much. I love Caitlin Dickerson, gem of a reporter. I think in terms of writers, I sadly am like in a fiction drought. Like I haven't read anything in a long time, but I loved both of Britt Bennett's books that I read. Oh yeah. I thought they were so beautiful. And just like like deep but minimal. Just really, really like delightful. I love and I'm jealous of all the reporting that Jonathan Blitzer does, but he knows that. J.P. Brammer, I really like his writing too.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's constantly people that I'm kind of like, whenever they come out with something, I'm like, oh, exciting. Gia Tolentino, every time she comes out with something, I'm like, yes, must read this. And in terms of radio, I'm like sadly really bad at listening to podcasts. Like I do my good journo diet of like, I listen to The Daily, I listen to Ezra Klein, so I know what's going on in the world. Sometimes I like dabble in a little Up First. But in general, I just haven't sunk into anything long form in a long time. I think the last long form thing I really sunk into was the Retrievals, which I love. But again, Susan knows I love her and everything that she does is so good. I'm always looking for recommendations though, because I love listening to stuff, especially on my commutes. But right now, it just seems like there's such a saturation of news that I'm just like, somebody tell me what to make sense of, please. I loved the series Autocracy in America. That was really helpful. Speaking of like news saturation, like that was one that I listened to and I was like, this is like helping me parse through things.
Mm-hmm. That's a good list. Nadia, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks again to Nadia for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. If you like what we're doing with Nieman Storyboard, leave us a written review and a rating in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can also share this podcast with a friend. We'll see you soon.